Hello, I'm Irma Baker. Welcome to our show. We're sponsored by RSVP. That's the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, and it's a part of Mature Services, which offers many opportunities here in our viewing area. Well, our guest today is someone whose job it is to look out for the interests of seniors. We'll be right back with him after this message.
RSVP of Summit County has been making a difference in our community since 1972. RSVP volunteers are increasing the quality of life by participating in programs and organizations that provide important services to the community. RSVP matches personal interests and skills with opportunities to serve. If you're interested in adding more meaning to your life and improving the lives of others, please call 330-253-4597 extension 166.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Dr. E. Douglas Beach, and he is the CEO of the Western Reserve Area Agency on Aging. Dr. Beach, so wonderful to have you with us here today.
Nice to be here, Ms. Baker. Call me Doug, please.
I will. I'll call you Doug, and I'm so pleased to have this conversation with you today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Well, you have quite a significant role here because your agency covers 5 counties here.
We have Cuyahoga, let's make sure I get them right, Cuyahoga, Geauga, Medina, Lake, and Lorraine.
That's a lot of territory to cover, so it's certainly why you would be called the Western Reserve Area Agency on Aging. But what's interesting here, I think, is that you didn't start out to have this kind of a career.
No, I didn't. Kind of eclectic. My PhD is actually in agricultural economics. And I was working for the USDA, and in 1995 my dad got inoperable thyroid cancer. And so I was trying to get back to Ohio, and one of the first jobs that came up was Deputy Director of the Ohio Department of Aging. And Director Brockman at the time asked me why in the world I'd want to go from agriculture that I'd done my whole life to aging, and I said as an economist it was a no-brainer. I was going from a low-growth industry to a high-growth industry, and now I've been at it for well over 20 years.
Well, it certainly sounds like your background really prepares you well to be working on aging, because the economics of our times are hitting seniors very hard.
Yeah, not only personally, but the economics from a government funding perspective. We're having some real issues up around Cleveland and some of the cities that some of the revenue hasn't been generated because of the recession. Housing values are down, and as a result, some of the senior centers are closing.
Now, we've seen some of that economic fallout in the Wadsworth area here and through Medina County and the whole area. Fortunately, we have a wonderful new community center here, but we're one of the more fortunate ones in having that. Well, what do you see?
Well, here, you guys have the best facilities of anybody I know, and I know a lot of folks in Ohio as well as Florida. So great, kudos to you all for such a great facility, such a great concept to be paired with the YMCA and of course SUMA and then the high school all at the same time. It's just a great idea. But what we're seeing is many of the traditional senior centers all around the 5-county area, actually all around the state, are just really struggling to come up with funds. As you may or may not know, our funding has been static since 2002. They looked at the Older Americans Act, which creates organizations like ours, and the number of seniors since 1980 has increased nearly 60%. Funding for Older Americans Act programs, Meals on Wheels, congregate meals, senior centers, has gone down 34%.
How do you ever, as an economist, deal with that?
Well, we're creative. We're finding ways to do more with less. Many of the counties and cities have funding for us either through levies or some innovative programs by many of the mayors and many of the county execs, figuring out ways to bring in philanthropic dollars. You know, we're just stretching our budget as far as we can.
Well, really, what is your mission? What is it that the Western Reserve Area Agency on Aging does?
Well, we are, do you know how the Older Americans Act was set up?
I think why don't you refresh us on that?
Many of you may remember back in the 50s and 60s that we had old people's homes all around Ohio, and what would happen is if someone didn't have relatives to stay with, and they were too sick or too poor to take care of themselves. They went to these old people's homes. Now, the one I was familiar with actually was a working farm, and if you couldn't work for your living, you went to bed to die, essentially. The poverty rate in the senior population in the 1950s and 60s was a little over 40%. So nearly 1 in 2 lived in poverty. Great Society programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Older Americans Act came in 1965. Medicare, probably the best medical program of its type in the world. Medicaid pays for long-term care stays in nursing homes. And then the Older Americans Act sets up Meals on Wheels, as well as congregate meals, socialization. And so we're dating ourselves back to the mid-60s, progressed through the 70s and 80s. We got involved in the Medicaid programs in the 80s and 90s, and have done quite well for a long period of time. But the problem now is, as you suggested, the demographics are starting to catch up with the funding, and it's tough.
How do you really target that for action?
Well, my role, getting to your earlier question, my role, according to the Older Americans Act, is to be the prime advocate for seniors in the 5-county area. And so what we're doing is we're working issues in in Columbus as well as DC, but we're also working issues locally and looking at things that we can do by raising funding ourselves. You know, we're going to have a meals campaign, we hope, in the 5-county area, working with the folks in Medina to see what they can do possibly. You know, I know they had a levy that was voted down, but it was very squeaky thin of what we can do for seniors in that type of process. So we're just trying to be as creative as we can be.
Well, I actually want to pick up on that almost slip of the tongue you just had when you mentioned Tallahassee, because you've been with us now just for a year.
Yeah,
and
11 months.
11 months.
Right.
And before that, you were doing similar work down in Tallahassee, Florida. And I bring that up specifically because I think our perception here is that Florida is filled with older people.
Yeah, it's a little. I was deputy director. Actually, I was secretary, Department of Elder Affairs in Florida, and when Charlie Crist was governor, one of my predecessors actually said that Florida needed to cordon off the borders and not let any more seniors come down. And that actually wasn't true at all, because seniors were the economic mainstay of Florida. You know, Medicare and Social Security spends like any other dollars. The seniors voted more than anybody else in Florida, and we have the same dynamic here. We know that Medicare in the 4-county area, 5-county area, is a $20 billion proposal. We know that Social Security is a $50 billion proposal, so it's real money being spent by seniors. We also know that seniors, a lot of seniors, 79% of seniors own their own homes in the 5-county area, so they're paying for school taxes. And we also know that in the last gubernatorial election, seniors were 27% of the registered voters, 42% of the people who voted. So it's a really strong economic and political power base that a lot of folks don't understand, Florida as well as here.
Well, I think that does come as a surprise to many people,
Right.
Certainly to me and to, I'm sure, many of our viewers, because we get this feeling that all the emphasis is on, you know, the younger people
Right.
or the working people, and that
Right.
seniors are kind of just shunted to the side. But from what you're saying, they really have a voice and a power.
Huge, particularly at the voting styles. You know, how can we get more seniors out looking and vetting candidates? If you looked at the last presidential election, there was 1 or 2 senior issues that they discussed, but it had no resonance. And so this is what we need to do, is talk about our issues. Clearly there are financial issues out there, but there are issues, you know, you do some stuff with mature services. A lot of seniors would like to work half a day, so what about job sharing? How do we get them back in the workforce if that's what they wish to do, and take advantages of those many years of experience? And seniors often are a calming effect on younger folks. And how do we get those synergies going on as we move forward?
Do you see much intergenerational activity or desire on either side?
Well, we had a program, again, this was Florida, called Communities for a Lifetime, which looked at that intergenerational. Hope to bring some of that up here. We're trying to do write some grants to start programs like that. But you know, you see it every day. The cutouts in sidewalks, help women pushing strollers, and seniors that have gait problems. You know, you go and families will be sitting around the table and they'll listen to the adults, but the kids and seniors tend to be shunned. You go to a grocery store and the adult will get up before, and there'll be a senior and a young person there that may not get waited on as quickly as possible. The other one that I always like to talk about is transportation. You know, as you get older and can't drive anymore, you're just like a young person waiting for a relative to make sure that you can get where you need to get. So a lot of synergies between what happens with children and happens with seniors, and we just need to figure out a way to value both ends.
You know, that brings up a good point, this whole idea of transportation.
Right.
I have a friend in another state, not Florida or Ohio, but who keeps putting off going for a colonoscopy because she has no one to take her home.
Right.
And that's the requirement.
Yeah.
So this transportation issue, as you said.
And it's particularly difficult. I'm from Lincoln County, Ohio, which is right outside of Columbus, but it's rural. Wadsworth is rural. It's particularly difficult in rural populations, but what tends to happen in rural populations is that friends and family nearby will step up a little quicker than we necessarily see all over in some of the urban areas where they may have access to transportation.
Well, how can you approach a problem like that? What can you really do?
Well, I think what we need to do is get the best minds around the table, figure out ways that we can get the philanthropic community, the religious community, and the government community together, and then just come up with a game plan. It's worked some other areas. I think we can make it work here.
How are you finding, are you coming in, having been out of Ohio for a while?
Yeah, 20 years.
Coming 20 years, and in a variety. You were in Washington, D.C., you were in Florida, and now you're back in Ohio. How do you see us in terms of those things like the philanthropic contribution, the religious contribution, the political involvement? How do you see that here as compared with other areas?
Well, Ohio has been a leader in these areas for as long as I can remember. And I started in the network in 1995 and have been in various areas over the last 20 years. So Ohio has always been considered to be a leader. And those three areas actually work better here than they do in many other states. So that we're thankful for that. Our problem right now is just that this recession was one of the worst recessions in the history of the United States, maybe the worst recession. How do we do the next steps where more people are working and we can start generating some of that philanthropic activities? As you well know, when the economy goes south, giving goes south. And it's difficult.
Well, I know that this recession has lingered for quite a while now, and as you said, your funding has not been increased, did you say, since 2002?
2002 was the last time we got an increase, and then 2 years ago we got hit by sequestration. And why would they hit us with sequestration? But they did about a 4%, 5% across the board cut. We got most of those monies back, but still 4 or 5%. In our 5-county area, we are serving fewer meals, 611,000 fewer meals than we did in 2002.
But aren't there more people now who need that?
Absolutely. I think there's a government solution, but I also think that there's a philanthropic solution. So what we're going to try to do is get the right people around the table and see if we can have a campaign for meals.
It's certainly needed. There are so many people who, you know, women who get older and just don't cook anymore. And with the prices of prepared foods, and as well as the nutritional aspects and such.
Well, this is what floored me. I left Ohio in '95, and in '95 we were one of the best states in the union in nutrition risk for seniors. So the low nutrition risk, everybody seemed to be pretty well along their way to what they needed to do. Come back 20 years later, and we are the worst state in the Midwest for nutrition risk, and we're the 6th worst state in the United States for nutrition risk. How can that happen in Ohio?
Well, What do you think caused it?
Well, funds dried up, probably lost a lot of industry over that 20-year period, although the greater Cleveland area seems to be coming back rapidly as we hope. But people aged in place, I'm sure that was part of it. It's just been a really difficult 20 years.
You know, you mentioned the recession and the the fact there's not been any funding increase since 2002. And I'm thinking, back when the recession started, there were people who lost their jobs.
Absolutely.
And those people were very often in their 50s.
Right.
Well, now we're talking them, they're in their 60s, or
Right.
maybe they're in their 70s.
Right.
It is even harder now for them to regain the position that they were. What can you do? And I don't mean you personally.